Right, before we come to the Minister's statement on the China case, before the Minister, I will wish to make a brief statement. Members will know that I've already put on record my disappointment that the charges against 2 individuals relating to espionage for the Chinese authorities have been dropped. Not only disappointment, but I'm very angry. It is of the utmost importance to me that all those who work in this Parliament are able to undertake their activities securely and without interference. I continue to seek advice from officials on what further steps might be taken to pursue the issue in other ways. I will be issuing an updated security guidance to members later today. I think there is something the government ought to be aware of. It is this Parliament that has been spied on. It is MPs who have been here. It is MPs' offices that have been infiltrated. And as it stands, what we have seen is the payment for spying on what I believe we should be protected. At this moment, I feel we haven't had the protection. I certainly don't blame the Minister. I know that he will be answering a lot in his statement and taking many questions. But I do want to put on record, I'm angry, I'm disappointed. My job is to protect Parliament. I feel we aren't getting that protection. I now call the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to update the House, with your permission, on the facts surrounding the collapse of the trial of Christopher Case and Christopher Berry. Christopher Berry and Christopher Cash. However, following on from the Home Secretary's statement, I also want to take the opportunity to express my deepest sympathies for the victims and families of those affected by the abhorrent terror attack that occurred at Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue in Manchester on Yom Kippur. Tragically, 2 members of the UK's Jewish community lost their lives. They remain in our thoughts, and I know the thoughts of the whole House at this very difficult time. I also express my gratitude for the rapid reactions of emergency responders, the security services and members of that local community. 2 days later, a mosque in Peacehaven, East Sussex, was targeted in an arson attack. Fortunately, no one was injured. My thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, will be with members of that local community there as well. We remain united in standing against hate in all its forms. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I told the House in September, the government remains extremely disappointed by the outcome of the Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry case. I understand the strength of feeling across the House and share the deep frustration that these individuals will not face trial. While the decision not to proceed was an independent one made by the Crown Prosecution Service, the government remains gravely concerned about the security of our democratic institutions and is crystal clear that our Parliament must and will be protected from espionage. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I am announcing today that MI5's National Protective Security Authority will be taking further steps to protect our democratic institutions from foreign interference, and I will set out more details on that in a moment. Now, Mr. Speaker, since I addressed the House on the 15th of September, there has been correspondence between honourable members, the Government and the Crown Prosecution Service. There has also been widespread and at times wholly inaccurate reporting in the media. Mr. Speaker, I will address the details set out by the Crown Prosecution Service and the basis on which the Government provided evidence to support the case. But first, let me underline a fundamental point, one that has too often been overlooked in recent days, including by the party opposite. The CPS brought these charges under the previous government under the legislation that was in place at the time, the Official Secrets Act of 1911, an antiquated law that is clearly no longer fit for purpose in addressing the complex and sophisticated nature of the state threats that we face today. It has been clear for many years that this legislation has not kept pace with the modern state threats that we face today. It was evident that the Official Secrets Act was no longer fit for purpose as early as 2015, when Conservative ministers tasked the Law Commission with reviewing this antiquated legislation 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker. In 2020, the Law Commission and the Intelligence and Security Committee of this House were both clear that this legislation, drafted before the First World War, needed to be updated as a matter of urgency. It referred to espionage as any sketch, plan, model, article, note, document, or information that might be useful to an enemy. These terms are archaic in the modern threat landscape that we now face. That is why, on this side of the House, we supported the passing of the National Security Act of 2023 on a cross-party basis, closing the loopholes that have been exposed by this particular case. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Director of Public Prosecutions has written to the chairs of the Home and the Justice Select Committee about this case, and it is welcome that these facts have been set out. He has made clear that charges were brought in April of 2024 based on the law as it stood at the time of the offences. The Deputy National Security Advisor, a senior official with very extensive experience in matters relating to national security, provided a witness statement in December 2023 under the previous government. Further witness statements were requested and provided in February and July of this year. All of the evidence provided by the Deputy National Security Advisor was based on the law at the time of the offence and the policy position of the Conservative government at the time of the offence. Every effort was made to provide evidence to support this case within those constraints. Now, the decision about whether to proceed with the prosecution was ultimately taken by the CPS, who were hamstrung by antiquated legislation that had not been updated by the previous Conservative government.
Between front benches, please, this is very important. The serious matter we can do out the side chatter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the evolving nature of the state threats that we face, the DPP has given his assurance that the CPS were not influenced by any external party, any member of this government, nor any senior civil servant or special advisor working within it. And I want to be clear again today, as the government has before, that suggestions that the government concealed evidence, withdrew witnesses, or restricted the ability of witnesses to draw on particular bits of evidence are all untrue. The DNSA did not materially change its evidence and was under no pressure from anyone to do so. Mr. Speaker, what has changed is the CPS's assessment of the case law. The DPP has explained that the ruling by the High Court in a separate case, the Crown versus Rusev, ruled on the threshold for evidence needed to prosecute under the antiquated 1911 legislation. In light of this new judgment, the CPS independently decided to seek further evidence. But the fact remains that it was not the policy of the Conservative government to classify China as a threat to national security. As the Right Honourable Member for Braintree said as Foreign Secretary, summing up China in one word as a threat was, and I'm quoting, impossible, impractical, and most importantly, unwise. Now, I've listened with interest in recent days to advice from former Conservative ministers on how the UK should now define our approach to China. But I must remind them and the House that what matters is what their policy was in government. The previous government set out its position on China in the 2021 Integrated Review, where they described China as a systemic challenge to UK security. In the Integrated Review refresh of 2023, they described China as an epoch-defining challenge. That's why, and as the Prime Minister has explained, the current government's policy position was immaterial to the assessment that was made by the CPS. Now, ministers cannot retrospectively change policy that existed under the Conservative government. And as stated before, the CPS decision to drop the case was not influenced by any member of this government, nor special advisor or senior official. Now, Mr. Speaker, in this moment of profound global change and insecurity, these matters have led to discussion about this government's approach to China. So let me set that out before the House today. We must tackle the threats China poses, from cybersecurity attacks, foreign interference, and espionage targeting our democratic institutions, to the transnational repression of Hong Kongers in the UK. This government is unequivocal. The first duty of the government is to keep people safe, and we fully recognise that China poses a series of threats to UK national security. Yet we must also be alive to the fact that China does present us with opportunities. It is the world's second largest economy, and together with Hong Kong, the UK's third largest trading partner. The only way to act in the UK's best interest is to take a long-term and strategic approach. This means working in close coordination with Five Eyes and wider allies to build collective resilience against the threats that China poses, investing in our intelligence services and being unequivocal about our position on human rights. It also means developing a consistent and pragmatic approach to economic engagement without compromising on our national security. To that end, let me set out the recent actions the government has taken to strengthen UK security against state threats, including those posed by China. MI5's National Protective Security Authority has today launched new guidance to protect the UK's democratic institutions from foreign interference. The guidance will help honourable members in this and the other place, members of the devolved legislatures, local councillors, mayors and elected representative staff to better understand the nature of the threat. It also provides simple, effective steps for individuals at risk to protect themselves, their teams and the integrity of our democratic processes. This guidance will kickstart a wider cross-government action plan that is being driven through the Defending Democracy Task Force to reduce foreign interference and espionage threats to UK democratic institutions. This will be delivered in close coordination with the Parliamentary security authorities. Now, I'd like to take a moment to urge all members of this House to be alert and to follow the guidance. I also urge members to take up the National Cyber Security Centre's important opt-in service for members of both houses. The government also remains steadfast in its commitments to holding China state-linked actors accountable for wide-scale cyber espionage. In September, NCSC co-sealed a US-led technical advisory calling out Chinese state-sponsored cyber threat actors targeting global networks, including here in the UK. I can reassure the House that we continue to keep all tools under review and will act as necessary to reduce their threat. Now, Mr. Speaker, the government is also committed to legislate to further strengthen safeguards against foreign interference. This specifically includes a new elections bill to strengthen safeguards against covert foreign political funding. It also involves taking forward the recommendations from the independent reviewer for state threats legislation. Mr. Speaker, let me finish by reiterating this government's unwavering commitment to national security and to keeping our country safe. We will take all necessary action to deter those who seek to do us harm and ensure that the UK is best placed to tackle state threats. That includes threats emanating from China. I commend this statement to the House.
Yeah. The Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself with the Minister's remarks about Heaton Park Synagogue? And can I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for all the work that you've done on the security of members. No one has worked harder to protect the integrity of our Parliament. Mr. Speaker, the Security Minister, or Madam Deputy Speaker, I should say, the Security Minister is very well regarded. So I'm sorry to see him sent here again, making these arguments which will not wash. This is about the ineptitude of the government, and I cannot accept much of what he says. He's brought some updates to the House, which we acknowledge, but in essence, China spied on this Parliament, and they're issuing us with leaflets. This is not good enough. Mr. Speaker, there are members here today who have been spied on by China, who are sanctioned by China. Even the Deputy Speaker has been sanctioned. All MPs speaking today should be acting in the national interest, nothing else. Let's remind ourselves of what's happened. 2 men have been accused of spying on MPs in this very building. The CPS had what it felt was a clear and compelling case to prosecute. But the trial has collapsed because for months and months, the government has been refusing to give the CPS vital information. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This looks like a deliberate decision to collapse the case and curry favor with the regime in China. And instead of admitting this, the Security Minister has come here blaming the Official Secrets Act. But we know that the Act was enough to prosecute this case. Its deficiencies had nothing to do with the government's failures. And Madam Deputy Speaker, may I remind the House how serious this is? If the government does not prosecute those who spy on us, it sends a message to the public that the government does not care about their safety. It sends a message to our allies who share intelligence with us that Britain cannot be trusted. And it sends a message to those who spy on us that they can get away with it. Let's look at the facts. First, the government blamed the CPS. The minister came to the House on the 15th of September. He claimed that he had only become aware of this decision that day, and that the CPS decision had been an entirely independent one. He repeats that assertion today. He said, "I am not able to talk about why the CPS has decided to make this decision." He said it was not for him to speculate on the reasons. He told the member for Rutland to seek a meeting if she wanted to find out the reasons. But we now know, despite all he has just said, that the trial collapsed because the government refused to give the CPS what it needed, and the minister knew full well why it had collapsed. Because the Director of Public Prosecution has said he spent months trying to get the government to provide the evidence it needed. Second, they tried blaming the previous government. Just like the Prime Minister, the Minister claims the CPS couldn't prosecute because the last government didn't describe China as a threat. I cannot believe that he would actually say that. He knows what we said. He knows. Let me remind him, Madam Deputy Speaker. For starters, the 2021 Integrated Review described China as, listen carefully, the biggest state-based threat to the UK's economic security. The 2023 Integrated Review refresh said China posed, let's listen carefully, a threat several times. In 2024, the then Minister for Security said from that dispatch box that China poses a serious threat. But even if the last government had not said China was a threat, and it did, the government only needed to convince a jury that it was a threat. And he knows that. I am astonished that the minister has repeated this nonsense today. The minister and the Prime Minister's argument on this has been refuted by no less than a former DPP, 2 former cabinet secretaries, 1 a former national security advisor, refuted by 2 former heads of MI6, and a professor of public law at the University of Cambridge who said today that minister statements so far are misleading about the legal position. They are all clear that these people could have been prosecuted under the old legislation. Is it the government's position that they are all wrong and they're right? Madam Deputy Speaker, the minister references Crown versus Rousseff. That case last year he refers to in his statement made it easier to prosecute, not harder. And as the former Director of Public Prosecution says, recruiting people to spy on MPs of itself clearly constitutes a threat to national security. Only this government could mess that up. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, has a very close relationship with China. Are we supposed to believe that he was not involved in the substance of the case and discussions around that, as they say? What does that even mean? He was in those meetings acting in the name of the Prime Minister. Do they really expect us to believe that he never mentioned to the Prime Minister any of this at any point? Madam Deputy Speaker, we know from the CPS that they spent months and months asking the government for evidence they needed. The government says it was not the NSA who took the decision not to give it to them. So who was it? Who made that decision? Can the Minister answer that today? Is it seriously the government's argument that no minister knew anything about this until the trial collapsed? If this is the case, it is astonishing. But my suspicion, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it is not the case. My suspicion is that ministers did know. They have the Chinese super embassy in their in tray. They have £1 billion compensation they're allegedly being asked to pay for nationalising British Steel. I suspect that they have decided that closer economic ties with China were more important than due process and our national security. And if this is the case, if that was the decision of this government, then they should just tell us that and have the backbone to admit it. They should explain it to the public, they should explain it to the CPS, they should explain it to our international allies and let them all be the judge. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not going away. There is nowhere to hide. I wrote to the Prime Minister today and I'd like to know when I will get a response to my questions. And we have also written to the CPS to ask if this trial can be reopened if the government finally provides the evidence it's been holding back. We know that the evidence that the CPS needs exists. And if the government decides not to provide it, then we will know it is because this weak Prime Minister does not have the backbone to stand up to Beijing.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I do find it genuinely astonishing that at no point the Leader of the Opposition acknowledged that all of these acts that we've been talking about this afternoon happened when she was in government, on her watch. And also, because I believe it's important to discuss these matters in a fair and reasonable way, I particularly made sure that she had early sight of the statement I was intending to give her ample opportunity. She clearly has not read the statement. She either didn't read the statement or didn't listen to what I said, because she's asked me a number of...
Order. This statement is very, very important, both to me and to my constituents. Please, let's hear the Minister. Minister.
Thank you. I took every opportunity to give her, as long as I possibly could, so that she could look at the points that we were seeking to raise today, and she's asked me questions that I answered in my earlier responses. And I say that to her because it's important, I think, that we seek to discuss these things in a reasonable way. Matters relating... Right honourable gentleman sort of guffaws from a sedentary position. I think actually it is important that on matters relating to national security, we should seek to discuss these in a reasonable and consensual way, and that is the approach of this government. I'm genuinely really sorry that she's taken the opportunity to make a whole series of baseless smears this afternoon. But perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised, because the statement that we've heard from the Leader of the Opposition is sadly typical of what we've heard from some of her colleagues in recent days. Now, for days, the party opposite has been making baseless claims that this government deliberately collapsed an independent legal process through political interference. There's not a shred of evidence to back up any of those accusations that she's made. And I really don't think, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a responsible way to discuss matters of national security. I remind the Leader of the Opposition that whatever members might say this afternoon, we are here today because of legislation that existed under the previous government and because of policy that existed under the previous government. Now, the Leader of the Opposition referenced the letter that she had written to the Prime Minister. Now, because we want to take the opportunity to respond to her in a timely fashion, I'm going to do that now and respond to the points that she made to the Prime Minister earlier on. But in case that she has forgotten, it was the Right Honourable Lady herself in September of last year and said, and I quote, "I have shied away from calling China a threat." And that was the Right Honourable Lady. And she articulated that the previous government's policy as Business Secretary, saying in September of 2023, and these are her words, "We should certainly not be describing China as a foe." The Right Honourable Lady's own words. Now, a number of questions have been raised from the opposition front bench, including in the Right Honourable Lady's letter that she published earlier today. And I'm very happy to set out the government's response to the answers that she has asked. First, on the question of what ministers knew about the government's interactions with the CPS. Ministers were aware that evidence was being provided by the Deputy National Security Advisor to the CPS as they built a case for prosecution, as was first agreed under the previous government. Ministers and special advisors did not take decisions about that evidence, and they were not cited on the contents. The Deputy National Security Advisor was given full freedom to provide evidence without interference, as was the case before the general election. Second, on whether the Prime Minister was briefed by ministers or the National Security Advisor about this case. She asked that question in her letter. The Prime Minister has already confirmed he was briefed on this case by officials, not least because the case began under the previous Conservative government. Third, there have been various reports alleging that in a meeting in September, the National Security Advisor ruled that China could not be defined as a threat and took decisions relating to witnesses or evidence. This is simply untrue. Of course, the NSA takes part in discussions about national security and diplomatic relations. That is literally his job. But any discussions were on the basis that the case would be going ahead and how to handle the implications. The National Security Advisor was not involved in any decisions about the substance of the evidence. And in answer to the fourth question that was raised by the Leader of the Opposition, that means he made no decisions about the content of any evidence. Well, honourable members have asked for a thorough explanation, and I'm giving that to them. They might pay the House the courtesy of listening to the responses. So that means that National Security Advisor made no decisions about the content of any evidence relating to the case itself. This was a matter for the Deputy National Security Advisor, a hugely experienced, highly capable senior official who provided evidence under the previous administration. On questions about when and I other ministers were aware that the case would not be proceeding, ministers were informed after the DPP had made his decision and shortly before reporting restrictions were lifted. The House will note that I came to the House straight away to make a statement. Finally, on the question of whether it might still have been possible to argue successfully in court that China was a threat, regardless of the previous government's position not to do so, that was a judgment for the Crown Prosecution Service. However, the Deputy National Security Advisor provided evidence reflecting the threats posed by China as the CPS built their case. And on the comments, and she referenced them, made by two former Cabinet Secretaries, I note they have both remarked that the Official Secrets Act was not fit for purpose. Of course, if the Conservatives' opposite had been swifter in replacing it, we wouldn't be here today. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, safeguarding our national security is the most fundamental responsibility of this government. In 14 years of Conservative rule, they were slow both to update our national security laws and adapt to the national security realities that we face today. And if we were to follow the approach of the party opposite, to ignore China and to refuse to engage with China, that is what would undermine our national security. And we will always defend our national interest on this side of the House.
Yeah. Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I begin by expressing solidarity with the two previous Conservative chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committee who would seem to have suffered having two Chinese spies in their offices, and how very distressing and upsetting and threatening that must have been. The DPP's claim of needing further evidence from the government and their decision not to publish the China audit has, I think, become conflated and has resulted in a great deal of muddle and confusion and allegations that the government is soft-peddling on China. Before we disappear down that rabbit hole, may I perhaps take us back to basics, which is these men were charged, as I understand it, with an offence under Section 11C of the Official Secrets Act. And the offence is to pass on information which might be directly or indirectly useful to an enemy. Now, when the Crown Prosecution Service are building their case, presumably they had a witness, and presumably that witness was the Deputy National Security Advisor, who was there to answer the question, is China an enemy? And without that evidence, there is no point in charging them in 2024. And what has changed since 2024? We're told that what has changed is that enemy is now...
Just be quiet.
This House will listen to the right honourable member with some respect. Dame Emily Thornberry.
So it seems that there's now case law saying that enemy is a threat to national security. Frankly, that seems to me to be a lower test, not a higher test. But if in 2024 there was evidence that China was an enemy and the Crown Prosecution Service had made a decision to prosecute on that basis, then I cannot understand why there has been a change now. The only other answer is that the Crown Prosecution Service did not properly assess the evidence before making those charges. It does seem to me that moving away from all the heat and fury, those are the central points.
Well, I'm grateful to her. She talked about muddle and confusion, and she's right. There's been a lot of particularly ill-informed commentary in previous days, and that's precisely why the government proactively has brought a statement to the House today in order to set out the facts of this particular trial. And I'm very happy to be able to do that, but let me do that again for her. The DPP has set out the reasons at the heart of his decision not to take this case to trial. He believed the evidential test was not met. The DPP took an independent decision on the evidence, as was set out in his letter of the 7th of October. The DNSA did not materially change his evidence and was under no pressure from anyone to do so. And as her constituency neighbour, the Prime Minister, has explained very clearly, the current government's policy position was immaterial to this assessment. It is only the government's policy at the time that the alleged offences were committed that is relevant. Now, she will understand that the CPS decision to drop the case was not influenced by any member of this government, nor special advisor or senior official. I have been crystal clear about that today. And the Director of Public Prosecutions has given his assurance that the CPS were not influenced by any external party. And as the government has already stated before, the suggestion that the government concealed evidence or withdrew or lent on witnesses are all untrue.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Matt Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. Over the weekend, Sir John Sawes became the latest former intelligence chief to express disbelief at the collapse of this espionage case. And our intelligence allies are now also questioning whether the UK can be trusted to counter China's growing threat. It's vital that we have a clear answer on who in government is responsible for the failure to bring this case to trial. Sadly, instead of clear answers, we've heard ministers over the weekend delivering vague and cryptic lines to tape. The nation has a right to understand which figures within government were involved with it in this process, not to proceed with a prosecution. Now, given the minister's statement that the government has not concealed the evidence or suppressed anything, will the minister commit to publishing a timeline? Who knew what? When did they know it? Who said what and when? Will he publish correspondence between all officials, politicians and advisers involved with the CPS? If he will, we can gain the clarity that we need and the British public needs today. Can the Minister confirm again with full confidence that the Prime Minister or any individuals who act on his behalf played no role in any decision to prevent the supply of relevant evidence to the CPS that might or might not include words of gentle encouragement either way? We must learn the lessons from this appalling episode so that we can have confidence in the ability of our national security laws to protect our interests and protect our democracy. That is the job of us in this House. This is the only way to provide the British public with the answers that they deserve and that they demand, and to rebuild the UK's credibility with Five Eyes allies. So will the government commit today to holding a statutory independent inquiry into the China spying case? Now, we know China poses a clear threat to this country's interests and values. That view is shared by those of us on these benches, as well as our intelligence chiefs. Yet the government's approach to this case is only the latest example of its unwillingness to challenge Beijing's efforts, both to expand its espionage capabilities in the UK and to export transnational repression to our shores. It is time for this government to take the steps necessary to protect our interests and those of our citizens. Working with the CPS, will the government look at all legislative options to prosecute the two individuals involved? Those options are still available. Will the government today block the application for the Chinese mega embassy? And will the Minister add China to the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme?
I'm grateful to him, and I welcome him to his new role. As he may know, I'm a regular visitor to his constituency, and I pay tribute to the important national security work that takes place there. He's asked me a number of questions, and with great respect to him, I hope that he will concede that I have responded to a number of them already. I did, though, just want to pick up the point he made about releasing information, because I think that is an entirely reasonable question that he has sought to bring forward today. What I can say to him about that is it is not for me to make decisions regarding evidence in the publication which may still be used in any further ongoing legal processes. So I hope he understands the reason why I'm not able to commit to do that at the moment. I absolutely take issue with the analysis with regard to the government's relationship with China, particularly with regard to transnational repression. I hope he will accept that the government takes that very seriously. We've done a lot of work through the Defending Democracy Task Force to ensure that we have the right resources in the right place to protect all of those who live here in the UK from the impact of transnational repression. But I'm very happy to discuss that with him further. He specifically raised the importance of our Five Eyes alliance. And I agree with him the importance of that. That's precisely why the UK has just very recently hosted the Five Countries Ministerial gathering here in London, where we cemented the excellent relationship that we have with our Five Eyes partners. We share intelligence with them on, as he will know, a very regular basis. That is a relationship that is in good health and has in no way been undermined by recent events.
Chair of the Justice Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government has made it clear that it regrets the fact that this case is not going ahead. While the Minister rightly says that the CPS acts independently when making charging decisions, will he go further than regret and say that as a matter of law and evidence that this prosecution should have gone ahead and the issue of innocence or guilt should have been determined by a judge and jury?
A huge amount of time for the honourable member. The expression that I used both on the 15th of September and again today on behalf of the government was that we are extremely disappointed. That is the expression that we have used again today. I hope that he will understand, not least given the select committee that he chairs, that it isn't appropriate for government ministers to be giving advice to the Director of Public Prosecutions or the CPS on matters of law. The CPS, the DPP, are rightly independent of government. And frankly, we go down quite a dangerous road if we get into a situation of politicians and ministers seeking to advise them and seeking to influence their decisions. That is not the approach that this government will take.
Affairs Select Committee, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is a real threat at the moment to public trust in the criminal justice system following the collapse of this trial. So can I ask the Minister if he will commit that both himself, other ministerial colleagues and other advisers will cooperate fully with any scrutiny work that is done by either my committee or the other committees represented in this House?
I can give her that absolute assurance. The government and both of the departments in which I serve take very seriously the importance of parliamentary scrutiny. The Right Honourable Lady, I think, conducts herself as chair of that committee with great gravitas, and of course I can give her an assurance on behalf of government that we will absolutely work closely with her and her colleagues to provide any information that they seek.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and following on from the point made by the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, it is vital that Parliament is able to examine what's happened here. The Government has made a commitment to transparency. We have a wrinkle in the fact that the National Security Advisor has been appointed as a special advisor rather than as an official, which means that he is having to appear in front of a committee of this House in camera. This is far from adequate. So will the Minister commit to engaging fully with the committee corridor to make sure that the relevant committees get access to information, as is normal, in a reading room, in camera or in a COBRA situation, in order to make sure that Parliament can satisfy itself of the comments that he has made so clearly at the dispatch box today?
Well, I'm genuinely grateful to her for the suggestions that she makes. I hope that she knows and that House knows, and I hope very much that Right Honourable members opposite on the front bench know, that my approach will always be to make as much information as I possibly can available to colleagues, whether that's through the Privy Council process or through other means. I do welcome the fact that the National Security Advisor will be giving evidence to the JCNSS. That will be taking place shortly, but very happy to look more closely at the suggestion that she has made and to give her an assurance that we will want to work very carefully with this House and with the committees of this House to make sure that they are able to do their important job of holding this government to account.
Duncan Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, can I say that, as my right honourable friend, Leader of the Opposition, said, the 2002 and 2003 integrated reviews were very clear. All the officials in there, the security services, called and said that China was a significant threat. That was sufficient to give to the CPS, not even by ministers, but by officials. The question is why not? But the question I really want to ask is this absurdity about the role or lack of role of the National Security Advisor. The government says that he wasn't involved in any matters of substance, but I simply say, isn't it the role of the National Security Advisor that they are involved in all matters of substance when it comes to national security? So I ask, what's the point of a National Security Advisor who does then not involve themselves in matters of national security, as in this case, but instead we are meant to believe that the Deputy National Security Advisor is allowed in this case to involve themselves in substantial matters of national security, but not apparently to discuss these substantial matters of national security with the National Security Advisor. This does seem to me to be an absolute matter of substantial absurdity.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman has been consistent over many, many years in expressing these concerns. I would gently point out to him that the situation which he describes as absurd is the same situation that we inherited from the previous government. And he's asked me about the National Security Advisor. Let me say something. He's a very experienced member of this House, so let me say something to him about the National Security Advisor. Over the past year, this government has rebuilt our international relationships, led on the global stage, and signed new agreements with multiple countries to safeguard our security and to grow our economy. National Security Advisor is doing an excellent job, and if he doesn't believe me, maybe he should speak to Steve Whitcroft.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share the fury of the Speaker with the collapse of this trial, as I'm sure all members do. This former Conservative Party researcher escaping justice is a huge disappointment. I'm really pleased that my honourable friend has been able to be so unequivocal about the facts of this case. It's extraordinary that, having listened to that, the Leader of the Opposition should carry on almost as though his statement hadn't existed, because he had answered many of the questions that that she was posing, or that she was choosing to ignore. But can he tell us, in terms of the changes that have happened since, can he be sure that if this offence took place now under the current legislation, that we would be more able to pursue this criminal conviction? And if not, can he tell us what he's doing to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, I'm grateful to him, not because it is actually a very useful question. And parliamentarians should be asking themselves the kind of question that the honourable member has just asked me. Yes, I can give him that assurance, and from this dispatch box on many occasions I have made clear the importance that this government attaches, as I'm sure the previous government did, to the National Security Act. It was a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and I previously, as the right honourable gentleman, my predecessor will acknowledge, on numerous occasions I've paid tribute to those who've been involved with it. His question is the right one. The NSA closed the loopholes that we are essentially debating today. So I can give him those assurances that our legislative framework is in a much better place than it was a couple of years ago. That said, because this government takes these matters incredibly seriously, we constantly look at the legislative framework to assure ourselves that it's appropriate. We work very closely with Jonathan Hall KC, who has made recommendations on behalf of a request from government about our legislative framework, and we've made a commitment that wherever there's a requirement for more legislation, we will bring it forward.
Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Integrated Review Refresh, which stated that the Chinese Communist Party posed a threat to our people and our security, was in fact published the very day these two men were arrested. But that in itself is a red herring, because the Bulgaria case proved that the jury is to decide whether or not a country is or could be in the future a threat, and it is not for the government alone to prove that. Now, the Minister told this House at our last UQ that the government demanded that the Chinese chargé d'affaires come in and be demarched. Did a Minister do that, or did an official do it? And my second question is, given that the House has been told how disappointed the government is by this outcome, what repercussions is the government choosing to put on the Chinese Communist Party, given they seem to be quite clear that the guilt and the evidence is there? Will they be cancelling JETCO? Will they be putting in place sanctions? Or will they be banning the embassy? And if they won't act, why not?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady has, of course, a very close personal interest in this case, and it will be well understood by members right across the House why she's expressed concerns today and previously. Now, I'm sorry that she doesn't feel that the government's response is adequate, but I will, and I give her this assurance, I will endeavour to ensure that this government does as much as we possibly can to work with her and her right honourable friend to ensure that she can have the confidence that the matters that she's referred to aren't able to happen again. She specifically asked me about the démarche that I referenced in it was a statement, not an urgent question, on the 15th of September. I can tell her that obviously, as she will know, that was done through the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, but I'll come back to her with more details about that should she wish.
Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement and introducing some facts to this debate. I can see that some alternative realities have come crashing down. But I do want to focus on the future and the commitment he's given to protect democratic life in the UK, in particular the cyber security measures. I mean, he will know this will rely at least in part on the Computer Misuse Act 1990. If memory serves right, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was when a 386 Amstrad was the best computer you could get. He will know many people think this Act fails to distinguish between malicious actors, state or otherwise, and cyber security professionals working in the public interest, perhaps a democratic interest. Can he commit to looking at this anomaly? Thank you.
Well, I'm grateful to him, not least for the point he made about facts matter. They really do. And that's why I've come to the House today in order to set out facts so members across the House can make a judgment about how they wish to proceed. I also think he makes a very important point about both cyber security and the ongoing review of the Computer Misuse Act. I can give him an assurance that we take these matters incredibly seriously. In fact, I will have more to say about it shortly.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister in his place and I have been friends for many, many years, and so it gives me no pleasure to say this. The statement that he has read out today, no doubt under instruction, has thrown out more chaff, set up more straw men than a Russian disinformation campaign. It's pure fabrication to claim that those are the relevant points, and sadly he knows it. He knows it because we discussed many of these issues when he was in opposition and I was in his place. He knows it because the various different security and defence reviews that have been updated in the last 4 years have set out the clear position of the threat. He knows it because when I sat or stood at the dispatch box, as he does, on the 15th of April 2024, I made clear the position of China being a threat. And he knows it, I'm afraid, because the truth is the Right Honourable Lady, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, set out exactly the right question. Yeah. And that is that the DPP has asked a very clear question. Why have we not had the information in time for these cases to proceed? He didn't say that the evidential threshold wasn't met. If it had not been met, then this arrest should never have happened, and he should be rightly hauling the head of MI5, the head of the counter-terror police, and the Treasury solicitor before him for abuse of power. He's not doing that because he knows the threshold was met. Instead, he should read the words of the DPP. The threshold is no longer met. Now, no longer means that there has been a change. There has been a change because something has changed. Now, that change could either be a commission or an omission. And from what we've heard today, from the way that the government has very carefully used language, it sounds much more likely that something has not been done than that it has. Now, as my friend knows, simply ignoring an order is not the same thing as not receiving one. And I'm afraid what this has done and what this statement does is advertise that the UK is not willing to defend itself against threats from hostile states. And I know that's not a position that he wishes to advocate.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman is, of course, as the House will know well, personally invested in this issue. And honourable members will understand the history and the reasons for the concerns that he's expressed. And I understand why he takes the opportunity to express them today and on other occasions. Now, the government fundamentally agrees with some of the concerns he's expressed, though clearly not with his subsequent analysis. Now, he'll have noted the point that I've made today about the issuing of guidance from the MPSA. We've published that today, and I hope that he will acknowledge the determination that exists from myself as the Minister and from colleagues right across government to provide assurances and to satisfy the concerns that he has. And one of the ways in which we'll do that is through the Defending Democracy Task Force, which he was a founding member of. I can say to him and to the House that provides the fulcrum point for us dealing with many of these matters right across government. It is something that has had its mandate refreshed by the Prime Minister, and it is a mechanism that we invest a lot in. It will seek to provide us with some of the answers that we need to give him the assurance that he seeks. I hope that he will understand that I'm stood ready to meet with him and the Honourable Lady to further discuss any concerns that they might have. He may not be satisfied today, but I will do what I can to provide that satisfaction and assurance as we go forward.
Jogi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents in Newcastle Lyme will welcome the clarity from the Minister that China is indeed a threat. And let me finish. Those threats to our national security don't just take place here, they take place overseas too. And I'm increasingly troubled, Madam Deputy Speaker, by the actions of the Chinese government in former British colonies across the world, not least in Africa. They are looting minerals, destroying nature and damaging democracy. This impacts us here too, and for far too long, Britain's been missing in action. We've let China run riot, and enough is enough. So can I ask the Minister, what engagement has he had with the Soft Power Council to ensure that they keep national security in mind as they carry out their work? And can I urge him to work with colleagues across government, particularly in the Foreign Office, because we need to get serious with China and fast, and that requires a cross-government approach.
Well, I absolutely agree with him that these are matters requiring of a cross-government approach. I mean, that is precisely the way that this government seeks to proceed with them. I mean, I think it is fair to say that the government has referenced concerns about the issues that he's raised on a number of occasions, but I'd be very happy to discuss them with him further should he wish to do so.
David Davis.
The Minister used the Rousseff case in his own defence. In that case, the Court of Appeal set the clear precedent that the appropriate definition of an enemy state is not down to what the government says, it's a state which behaves like an enemy.
Exactly that.
The judge stated plainly, and I quote him, "There is no reason, in our view, why the term an enemy should not include a country which represents a current threat to the national security of the United Kingdom." End of quote. So throughout the duration of this case, there's been ample evidence, including from the ISC, from the current director of MI5 and others, that China represents a threat to our national security, including at the time when Mr. Berry and Mr. Cash were acting as spies. So the Prime Minister's comments on this are frankly nonsense, and it's time, frankly, that we stopped kowtowing and took a stand against China. Now, if the Minister means what he said in terms of future dealings, will he start by doing what a number of people have called for and refuse to approve the espionage centre masquerading as an embassy at the Royal Mint? Will he reject it and tell the Chinese effectively that enough is enough?
Well, I always listen to what the Right Honourable Gentleman has to say, but that doesn't mean that I always agree with it. In fact, I don't agree with it today, and I'm not sure it's especially helpful to refer to the application made by China for an embassy in the way that he did. I can give him the assurance that I've given the House previously about the importance that we attach to national security in the context of that particular issue. I hope that he understands that the issue relating to the embassy is not a matter for me. There is a quasi-judicial process in place, and it is a matter for the Secretary of State for MHCLG. But the previous Home Secretary, the previous Foreign Secretary, have been crystal clear about the national security implications that underpin that decision.
Dr. Gibbons-Sunder.
Deputy Speaker, look, all of us across this House have an interest in protecting and preserving our democracy. Clearly, we have threats to our democracy, both internally as well as externally. Now, the Minister covered a little bit around the elections bill, but can they set out in more detail what the safeguards, what the protection will be for our democratic institutions and indeed for this place?
Well, I'm grateful to him, and it is a really important question that he's asked, because in July, the government published a policy paper outlining its proposals for an election and democracy bill, which we will introduce as the elections bill as soon as parliamentary time allows. Our intent is to modernise our democracy so that it is fit for the 21st century, including reinforcing safeguards against foreign influence in our elections. Now, in relation to political finance, and honourable members may want to listen very carefully to this, in relation to political finance, tough new rules will require parties to assess companies they are receiving donations from against a series of tests, proving their connections to the UK and to Ireland. This will end the status quo where a new company, registered today, owned by anyone, funded from anywhere, without even a single day of trade, can donate and have influence in UK politics. The introduction of Know Your Donor checks will increase scrutiny of donations, requiring recipients to conduct enhanced checks to decrease the risk of illegitimate donations entering our system, guarding against foreign interference. It will be very interesting to see whether honourable members opposite vote for it or not.
Sir Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister said categorically and very carefully that the National Security Advisor took no decisions as to the contents of the evidence provided to the CPS. So would he clarify to the House, did the NSA have any influence at all, direct or indirect, whether about provision or omission of the contents of that evidence by his own deputy that led to the collapse of the trial?
Minister.
Yes, I can give him that assurance.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank the Minister for his absolute clarity today. And he mentioned new measures. And I wonder if he could provide further detail on the measures he's announced today and how they'll protect parliamentarians, councillors and those in public life across the UK from foreign interference.
Yes. Well, the proposals contained within the elections bill will go a long way to hopefully providing that kind of assurance. But I again reference the importance of the work being done by the Defending Democracy Task Force. This is a mechanism that we inherited from the previous government, but it brings together ministers, law enforcement and senior officials to look very carefully at these issues and make sure that we've got the right resources in the right place. I hope very much that this will be a shared endeavour across this House to ensure that wherever there are attempts to interfere with our democracy, wherever there are attempts to harass and intimidate elected representatives, that we can stand together as a House against those threats.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister says that it's a matter for another department to decide about the Chinese embassy, and that's certainly true about whether they should have a new embassy or not. But the proposed new embassy is so large that it would be the biggest embassy of any country anywhere in Europe. That has national security implications, and if he wants to encourage people to believe that the government isn't cozying up to communist China, he should make recommendations accordingly. But may I just ask him about the extract that he read from the 1911 Act? I will read a slightly fuller one, though still with ellipses. It says, if any person, for purposes prejudicial to the safety or interests of the state, obtains or communicates to any other person any document or information which might be directly or indirectly useful to an enemy, he shall be guilty of felony. My reading of that is that the felony lies in the disclosure to anyone at all. It doesn't have to be to an enemy directly. So whether or not China was regarded as an enemy at the time, the nature of the sensitive material disclosed itself was a felony, even if it was disclosed to a China that was not regarded as an enemy. So surely the trial should have gone ahead.
Well, as the right honourable gentleman knows, I always value his sage advice and listen very carefully to what he has to say. Given the well, it's true, Madam Deputy Speaker. He asked about the embassy. I mean, given some of the nonsense that's been spouted about the embassy, I think what we do need to do is provide a Privy Council briefing for him and for other Privy Councillors so we can dispel some of this nonsense. And I'll be very happy to take that away. In terms of his second point, as he knows, these are points of law and these are matters for the CPS and for the DPP. They are not matters for ministers.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's clarity on tackling threats that China poses, including to the transnational repression of Hong Kongers in the UK. That will be a real reassurance to the many BNO nationals who live in Milton Keynes. I would like him to go into further detail, particularly in the context of the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee's report on Russia's interference in Brexit and the Nathan Gill case that's just completed on 8 counts of bribery coming from Russia. Of course, he at the time of taking these bribes was a close colleague of some of our MPs on the other side of the House. Yeah. How will the new elections bill stop the interference from political funding that we are seeing gaining more and more ground here in the UK and has a real threat to our democracy?
Can I ask the Minister to be brief and on point regarding what this statement is actually about? Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to her. The safety and security of Hong Kongers in the UK is of the utmost importance, and any attempt by any foreign power to intimidate, harass or harm individuals or communities in the UK will not be tolerated. In terms of the second point that she made and not wanting to get in trouble with Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just say that using a position of public office to effectively further Russia's malign interest while benefiting financially will not stand. It is a betrayal of our democratic values and of our electorate.
You're right.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has told us that his government's assessment of China is a mixture of national security threats and opportunities for engagement, including economically. But will he accept that is exactly the assessment made by the last government? Yeah. And that combination, with reference to the act we are concerned with and the offence that we are concerned with, doesn't require a country only to present a national security threat, simply that it does so, perhaps in combination with other things. Yeah. But that's the key point. The Minister's been very clear about that. So can I ask him this? Can we be clear on what happened with the government's evidence? Was it the case that the government could find no evidence on the point of China presenting a national security threat? Was it the case that the government internally decided that the evidence it could find would not meet the CPS's requirements? And if so, who made that determination? Or was it the case that the government did supply evidence to the CPS on that specific point and the CPS decided it wasn't significant enough? And if it's the latter, will the Minister either publish the evidence to the House, or if he doesn't think that's appropriate, and it may not be, would he give authority to the Deputy National Security Advisor to share that evidence in full with the Intelligence and Security Committee?
Absolutely. Well, I have a lot of time for the Right Honourable Gentleman, not least because he brings an almost unique perspective, both in terms of his understanding of the law and of matters relating to intelligence. I think he correctly made the observation that ultimately any government strategy with regard to China has to take consideration of national security issues, but at the same time, I think any fair-minded, reasonable government has to understand the economic opportunities that exist. Now, as a former Attorney General, I know that he will not recommend that I get into the business of second-guessing judgments and decisions that were taken by the DPP. But in terms of his point about publishing the evidence, hopefully he will have heard the response that I gave a moment ago. I'm responding to your Right Honourable friend's question. In terms of the point, the serious question that was actually raised from the backbenches about publishing the evidence, I hope that he will have heard the response I gave a moment ago.
Slow.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister states, and I quote, that we will take all necessary action to deter those who seek to do us harm, and that includes threats emanating from China. Yet despite ongoing transnational repression of Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, continued cyber security attacks in this country, members of this Parliament being sanctioned and spied upon, there appears to be no consequences for China, and the UK Government instead gives in to the coercive, bullying behaviour. So a very straightforward question. If the Minister is serious about deterring this behaviour and these threats, will he take the necessary action and include China on the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme? Yes or no?
Well, any decision about the enhanced tier refers will be brought forward to Parliament in the normal way. But what I can say to him is that any attempt by any foreign power to intimidate, harass or harm individuals or communities here in the UK will not be tolerated.
Thank you. Sir Bennett.
Mr. Speaker, since we know the very basic facts, which is that the Director of Public Prosecutions asked for a statement from the government to clarify that at the time of the offence, China was a threat to national security, and then he goes on to say in his letter that such an assurance or evidence or a statement from the government was not forthcoming. We know that the government withheld that vital element of the case. Well, he's shaking his head. But who decided that, in the words of the DPP, it should not be forthcoming? Somebody decided that. He seems to be saying it was the Deputy National Security Advisor, who is somehow accountable for making those decisions, but I question the point, accountable to whom, if not the National Security Advisor?
Let me seek to clarify. The Deputy National Security Advisor, who is a very senior and very highly regarded official with very extensive experience, obviously in matters relating to national security, provided a witness statement in December of 2023. This was under the previous government. I made this point earlier on. Further witness statements were requested and provided. And I made this point earlier on, both in February and July of this year. All of the evidence provided by the Deputy National Security Advisor was based on the law at the time of the offence and the policy position of the government at the time. I can give him an assurance. Every effort was made to provide evidence to support this case within the constraints that I've just outlined. The decision about whether to proceed with the prosecution was ultimately taken by the DPP and the CPS, who were hamstrung by antiquated legislation.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I admire the government's attempts to pin this on the previous Conservative government. It's an endeavour I'd usually join them on, but on this occasion I can't, because the argument simply doesn't stack up. The argument seems to hinge on the Conservative government's classification of China as a threat to national security. That's not a formal classification, that's one that needs to be substantiated, and the government seems to be arguing that it wasn't, because, for instance, in the Integrated Review refresh of 2023, it was merely described as an epoch-defining challenge. And yet in that same paragraph in that report, it talks about the Chinese Communist Party as presenting state threats to the UK's democracy, economy and society. In reports by the Intelligence and Security Committee of the same year, we talk about its ambition at a global level posing a national security threat to the UK. And we have heard other testimonies today from MI5 and others. And so my question to the government is, was this the sort of evidence that was provided to the CPS? If not, why not? And whose decision was it not to present this kind of evidence?
There is, I'm afraid, a fundamental flaw in the Honourable Gentleman's question. These activities took place under the previous government and under the legislation that was in place at the time. It isn't about seeking to blame the previous government, but it is a statement of fact to say that these activities, about which there is concern right across the House, took place in the previous Parliament and under the previous legislative framework. That is just a statement of truth.
I'm very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, who I respect very much indeed, that his answer to the question put by my Right Honourable friend, the former Attorney General, suggests more questions than he gave answers. Is he seriously suggesting that the National Security Advisor, with all of his links to Group 48 and to Ground View, had no involvement whatsoever in the advice that went to the Crown Prosecution Service? And would the Minister, whilst he's about it, clarify the apparent conflation of this country's economic ties with China, which he appeared to give in mitigation for the mess that the government appears to have got itself in?
Well, I respect him as well, and I hope that he will understand that any government will seek to balance issues relating to national security as well as issues relating to economic prosperity. I think that is not an unreasonable way in which to proceed. I do just want to pick him up about one point, though. The National Security Advisor does not have any links to Group 48.
Lisa Roberts.
He did.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Diolch yn fawr. Foreign interference in our democracy is, of course, deeply concerning. And transparency from government, and indeed all legislators, is essential. This includes in relation to past elected representatives, such as Reform UK's former leader in Wales, who has pleaded guilty to accepting bribes from Russia. So to uphold public accountability, will the Minister commit to work with the Attorney-General to publish the names of all individuals interviewed by counter-terrorism police in relation to the Nathan Gill bribery case? The people of Wales are rightly concerned.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady. She's right. Transparency is important, and if she'll forgive me, I'll look carefully at the point that she's made and take it away. I hope this also means, though, that she will be seeking to support our elections bill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to keep this quite basic, because I think this is where a lot of the public will come from. The government should always want to do everything it can and more to keep the British public safe and our institutions safe. So I don't understand why the government therefore won't do everything it possibly can to at least try to bring this to trial, to at least try to give a jury an opportunity to take their matters into their hands to consider this case. I don't understand why the government are willing to accept advice and not actually put this to trial when they have the opportunity to do so. Will the Minister please commit to publish all minutes from any meetings where matters discussed with the CPS or what the CPS had requested were asked for?
Well, I'll keep this basic as well. This government will do everything that we can to keep the public safe. And she will have heard the response that I gave previously with regard to publishing issues.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The stench emanating from the collapse of this Chinese spy case makes a manure heap seem positively floral. The bottom line, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that everyone's disappointed, everyone thinks there's enough evidence, everyone seems to agree that China is a security threat, and yet the case has collapsed and China has been given essentially carte blanche to carry on spying in the United Kingdom. I have it on good authority that senior figures in Washington now fear that Five Eyes has become Six Eyes. The one thing that has changed since charges were made in April 2024 is the National Security Advisor. So will the Minister commit that the National Security Advisor will appear and answer questions in person to any parliamentary committee that wishes to have those questions answered?
The Honourable Member talks about stench. He's got some brass neck, given what's gone on in his party recently. The National Security Advisor is a special advisor, and given the reference to the United States, I would again point the Honourable Member in the direction of President Trump's policy advisor, who has just this morning praised the contribution made by the NSA.
Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The problem the government has is that the story keeps changing, either each day or within a day. And the Honourable Member who's obviously giving the government position now is giving us one view, which completely contradicts the messages were made by government ministers over the weekend. Clearly, he's referenced huge numbers of meetings that took place, with which, with great disrespect, he wasn't present. So can he agree now that all those meetings and the minutes of those meetings be published so that everyone in this House can understand what has happened? If that's got to be done under certain rules so that the public doesn't get access to that, fair enough. But the reality is that until such time as the government comes clean, the stench of this is going to continue.
Let me give an assurance to the Honourable Member that I take very seriously the points that he has made. Clearly, there will be a legal dimension to all of this, but I'm very happy to go away and look at the point he's made, and I'll come back to him.
Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 2023, the Intelligence and Security Committee published a report on China in which it wrote that China was a whole-of-state threat. In the government's 2023 public response to the ISC report, the government wrote that it recognises the committee's concerns about the long-term strategic challenge. The ISC had used the word threat rather than challenge. Does the Minister regret that in 2023 the government's response to the ISC report on China did not use the word threat?
Well, with respect to him, I'm not going to get into critiquing whether they should have responded in a different way, because that is a matter for them. But he referenced the important work of the ISC. The government does consider that the ISC has a very important role to play in Parliament. They are obviously independent of government, and clearly it will be a matter for the Chair and for the Deputy Chair and for the wider committee to take a view about how they wish to proceed. But he referenced a specific report. All of that material would have been available to be considered by the CPS.
Dr. Luke Evans.
He is the Security Minister. I've been in here for almost an hour and a half, and I haven't actually heard him say, was China spying on Parliament, or is it even a consideration that it is spying on Parliament?
I've been crystal clear. I think that China, if honourable members will allow me, China poses a series of threats to the United Kingdom. I was very clear about what they were. I specifically referenced a number of particular issues. Couldn't have been clearer about that.
It seems to me, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sorry, that's the other Jim. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for coming forward? But as the Minister is aware, this topical issue is heavy in the hearts of many constituencies throughout this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as we consider national security has been a threat due to semantics with language, and the general public are asking for openness and transparency. I've been contacted on a number of occasions by concerned constituents of Chinese descent who believe that they are being shadowed by the Chinese Secret Service, and the decision not to prosecute means that they are feeling even more insecure, even more fearful, and this must be addressed. Will the Minister tell us exactly when the decision was made to classify China as non-threatening, and how will I tell that to my constituents who live in fear right now from this so-called non-threat?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him, as I always am. I think he's making reference to activity that took place under the previous government. But let me agree with his basic point that the public do want to know what's happened, and that's why the government have brought forward a statement today to provide that transparency. But what I also think the public don't want is ministers or politicians interfering in the legal process and either seeking to influence or persuade or cajole senior figures within the CPS, including the DPP. I don't think that is the right way to proceed. And if members opposite and right around the House step back for a moment, I think hopefully we can reach a consensus that it isn't right that ministers should be second-guessing legal rulings taken by the Crown Prosecution Service.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has comprehensively taken on several strawman arguments, answered questions that haven't been asked, and stuck to his carefully constructed sentences. One such example was ministers and special advisers did not take decisions about that evidence, and they were not cited on the contents. But was any minister, or the National Security Advisor, or any other special advisor, or senior official other than the Deputy National Security Advisor, such as the Cabinet Secretary, cited on the decision regarding the evidence sent to the CPS?
Minister.
Fundamentally, the decision was a decision for the DPP and the CPS, and I couldn't have been clear about the fact that this government has not sought to interfere with that process.
Yeah.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I listened carefully to the Minister's statement, but questions do remain. The Minister says that China poses threats. So we can know the scale of those threats, will the government now publish in full the China audit? The Minister says the government will act against transnational repression of Hong Kongers here in the UK. So will the government now implement targeted sanctions against the officials in Hong Kong and Beijing responsible for the bounties? And the Minister says the government will legislate against foreign influence. Will he ensure that the new elections bill tackles not only covert, but all foreign political funding, tightening up the opportunity for foreign actors to influence our politics through corporate donations?
Minister.
Well, the honourable member referenced the China audit. I'm sure that he will acknowledge that the then Foreign Secretary came to the House to give a statement specifically on the China audit. The reason that the China audit hasn't been published is because it is at a higher classification than would normally be published. I hope that his second point was at least a tacit welcoming of the government's elections bill. There will be a number of measures in there which I hope that he and his colleagues will be able to support. I think it is important that we seek to work together to transform the political landscape to make it much, much harder for those who seek to interfere in our democracy to do so.
Mullen.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister's made great play for the need to work on a cross-party basis on this issue. Can I gently suggest to him the time to do that was before the case collapsed, not asking us to do that afterwards. The Minister's lent heavily on the idea that it's what officials are willing to say about the threat or otherwise that China presumed, but officials don't make government policy and don't state the positions of the UK government. Ministers do. And so is there any good reason why the government, if it was struggling to find an official to describe in a written statement that China was a threat, they couldn't ask, for example, the former Security Minister, who was happy to do that at the dispatch box, who would give a statement, and many other government ministers, former government ministers, who I'm sure would have happily given evidence that China was a threat and enabled the case to proceed. What possible reason was there for not doing that?
Minister.
The honourable member talks about making great play. That's because I genuinely believe that important matters relating to national security should be conducted in a certain way, and where possible we seek to work across the political divide in order to establish a consensus. I thought there was a slight irony in the point that he went on to make. I agree with him. Ministers are accountable, and if members opposite want to hold ministers to account, that is absolutely a matter for them. What I think is most unfortunate, and I'm not saying that he was responsible for doing it, but others have, where members will seek to blame or infer criticism on officials. I don't think that is the right way to proceed.
Jim Allister.
It seems to me that the Right Honourable Lady, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, put her finger on the nub of this matter. What we know is that in April 2024, the CPS decided that the evidential test was met. And the evidential test was that there was a reasonable prospect of conviction of the offence of passing information useful to an enemy. Then we know that in September 25, the PPS maintained that the evidential test is not met. So what changed? Who changed it? How did we move from the evidential test being met to the evidential test not being met? Was evidence that was before the PPS withdrawn? Was it found to be unreliable? Or did the government fail to substantiate the evidence which enabled the evidential test to be met back in April 2024?
Well, with great respect to him, that's what I was at great pains to explain in my opening remarks.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does the Minister agree that the government has now set a perverse incentive for British officials where admitting espionage problems with China is seen as rocking the boat?
No, I don't agree.
Sammy Wilson.
Madam Speaker, the government hasn't had a great record in the court recently. Kneecap's case had been thrown out because paperwork wasn't correct. And now we have the spy case not proceeding because evidence wasn't provided. The facts of the matter are this, that China now controls many of our supply chains. China holds a lot of our national debt, and China is an important part of the economic framework in the United Kingdom because of investment in strategic industries. The general public may not understand the intricacies of how a case is built up and who's involved in it. But can the Minister understand that despite his excuse-ridden statement today, many people in the public might be coming to the conclusion that national security is being sacrificed because the government is not prepared to deal with the increasing economic dependency that we have in China?
No, I don't agree with him. There will be those, including in this House, who will seek to simplify the nature of the relationship to a single word. I think more sensible, fair-minded colleagues and certainly the public will understand that there are difficult choices that have to be made. But fundamentally, this government's approach will always be to ensure that we put our national security first. I've been crystal clear about that today. I've been crystal clear about it previously. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't seek to look for economic opportunities to trade with a country where there will be some economic advantage in us doing so. That seems to me entirely reasonable, completely pragmatic, but we will proceed on the basis that our national security comes absolutely first.
Ben Obsejective.
Deputy Speaker, last month the Security Minister came before the House and stated that he wasn't happy with the decision not to prosecute. I asked him why the government was dithering over formally challenging China, having excluded them from the enhanced tier of furs, and he suggested that the government was not doing this. Subsequent revelations have suggested that the government has acquiesced to Chinese threats to withhold investment and to waive the outstanding monies owed to Xingye. Would the Minister like to correct the record, explain why China isn't in the enhanced tier, given we are discussing spying for China? And could he clarify what role the National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell has played in deciding that they should not be classified in the enhanced tier alongside Russia and Iran?
Minister.
Well, extremely disappointed was the way that I described it both on the 15th of September and again today. I would gently say to the Honourable Member that he shouldn't believe everything that he reads in the papers, but he did ask me about furs. I hope he heard the response I gave some moments ago, where I said that we look very carefully at any decisions about placing a particular country on the enhanced tier of furs. Furs is an important part of the National Security Act. There were those, including on his side of the House, who said that we weren't going to roll it out. We rolled it out on the 1st of July. I said we were going to roll it out on the 1st of July, and we did. We looked very carefully at how we can most effectively use that tool, and we'll continue to look closely at that, but any decisions about the enhanced tier will be brought forward in the normal way.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government says that they want to take a long-term and strategic approach to China, but that's exactly what China does, whether it's increasing control over supply chains to gain leverage over the West, whether it's their Belt and Road programme and the debt trap diplomacy associated with that abroad. This is nothing less than a concession to an authoritarian regime, and this plays into their hands as they want to continue gaining economic and military leverage over the West. The head of the CPS said that he requested evidence from the government to allow the case to proceed. The government did not provide this evidence. Why not? And is it still the government's view that it's impossible to argue in court that China is a threat?
Minister.
With respect to his final questions, I think I've taken every opportunity to try and provide the government's response to those. I wasn't entirely clear of his critique of a long-term strategic approach, whether he thinks it's a good thing or not a good thing. I think it is a good thing that governments think carefully and strategically about their role in the world and the nature of the relationships that they have with countries like China. Yes, we have to be clear-eyed. Yes, we have to always defend our national security. But yes, we also have to ensure that we look for opportunities to contribute to economic growth as well.
Point of order to do with this very statement. Point of order, Neil O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like you, I am one of the parliamentarians currently sanctioned by China. And like many members of this House, I am left wondering whether it was not just our officers that were spied on, but our families, our homes and our children. And in the absence of a trial, I have no way of finding out what happened. Now, the Minister has been asked multiple times during this session whether he will publish the minutes of the meetings in which this case was discussed. We know from the DPP that over months and months they asked again and again for evidence which was not forthcoming. But without the minutes of those meetings, we are not able to find out what was asked for, why it was refused, or who made that decision. Madam Deputy Speaker, what means are available to this House for us to get hold of the minutes of those meetings, which the government does not want to publish? What parliamentary means can we have so that we can get hold of the minutes in which this was discussed, in which these decisions were made, so that we can find out the truth?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. I thank the honourable gentleman for some notice of that point of order. He's absolutely correct. He and I are one of 2 of 4 sitting MPs who are sanctioned by China. I have been advised to say that he should seek advice from the Table Office as a first step to see how these documents can be published. Now, the Minister has said repeatedly in responses to colleagues across the House that some material may or could be made public at some point. I'm not sure what that material will be or on which format, but I no doubt that he will seek advice from the Table Office to make sure that information is made available if it can. Unless the Minister wishes to respond to that point of order, I will let that fall and move on to the next statements.